cold wind howled through the dimly lit alley behind the grand velvet curtain theater. It was the kind of night where shadows seemed to breathe, and even the bravest hearts thought twice before venturing into the darkness. The theater, a historic gem in the heart of the city, had always been a hub of elegance and art. But tonight, it stood as the scene of something far more sinister: a murder. A chilling, inexplicable crime that would leave the city reeling and its people haunted. The discovery was abrupt. Emma Clark, the theater's young stagehand, had stumbled upon the lifeless body of Evelyn Rose, the star actress whose name had graced the marquee for weeks. Evelyn wasn't just a performer, she was the performer. Brilliant, beloved, and the heart of every production she touched. Her radiant smile and unmatched talent had drawn in audiences from all corners. But now she lay motionless in the center of the stage, the vibrant crimson of her gown eerily blending with the pool of blood beneath her. Emma's scream pierced the stillness, drawing cast and crew rushing to the scene. Gasps, whispers, and the trembling sound of footsteps echoed through the opulent theater hall, now marred by the weight of tragedy. The police were quick to arrive, their flashing lights painting the ancient facade of the building in shades of blue and red. But with every question asked and every alibi offered, it became clear that this wasn't an ordinary case. Detective Alex Hart was no stranger to solving mysteries, but this one already felt different. Alex, known for his sharp instincts and relentless determination, had seen his fair share of twisted cases in his 15 years with the force. But something about the atmosphere of the theater, the weight of its secrets, the whispers of its walls, sent a shiver down his spine. Was it the eerie way that chandeliers seemed to flicker as if mocking the life lost? Or was it the unmistakable sense that this crime ran deeper than anyone could yet comprehend? As Alex walked the stage, examining every detail, his eyes were drawn to the script Evelyn had been clutching tightly in her hand. A script that shouldn't have been there, according to the director. Its pages were smeared with blood, the words barely legible. But what caught his attention was the single line underlined in red ink. The final act begins when the curtain falls. It was a clue, cryptic and chilling, and Alex knew it couldn't be ignored. Was Evelyn's death part of some elaborate plan? A dark performance orchestrated by a killer who saw the world as their stage? The theater's history only deepened the mystery. Over the years, there had been whispers of strange occurrences, unexplained accidents, and actors who claimed to hear voices late at night when the theater was supposedly empty. Could it all be connected? Or was this simply the work of a cold-blooded killer who had a score to settle? The cast and crew, once united by their love for the art, were now bound by suspicion. The director, a man known for his fiery temper and perfectionism, seemed nervous, almost too cooperative. The understudy, whose jealousy of Evelyn was no secret, avoided Alex's piercing gaze. And then there was the enigmatic playwright, a recluse who had spent years weaving stories of betrayal and revenge, but had always kept his own life shrouded in mystery. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that each of them was hiding something. But what? And why? Time was of the essence. The longer the truth remained buried, the greater the risk that the killer would strike again. The stakes weren't just personal for Alex. This was about justice for Evelyn, for the dreams she had yet to fulfill, and for the city that had adored her. As the night deepened, Alex stood alone on the empty stage, the cold spotlight casting his shadow long and dark. The theater, so full of life just hours ago, now felt like a tomb. He whispered to himself, "Who are you? And what are you trying to say?" Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, slow, deliberate, and chillingly close. Alex turned sharply, his heart racing, but the theater was empty. Or was it? And so began the most intricate, unsettling case of Detective Alex Hart's career, a story where every suspect had a motive, every clue felt like a trap, and the truth? Well, the truth was more twisted than anyone could have imagined. The sound of footsteps sent a chill racing down Alex's spine. His instincts kicked in, and he spun toward the direction of the noise. "Hello?" he called out, his voice steady despite the sudden tension coiling in his chest. But there was no reply. The theater swallowed his words, leaving him in silence so thick he could hear his own heartbeat. He took a step forward, the old wooden floorboards creaking beneath his weight. The shadows seemed to shift, dancing in the faint glow of the emergency lights. Was someone still here? Watching him? He clenched his jaw and reached for his flashlight, its beam slicing through the dark. For a moment, he stood still, listening. Nothing but the faint hum of the theater's air conditioning and the distant drip of a leaky pipe in the wings. He exhaled, steadying his nerves. Maybe it was just the building settling, the echoes of the night playing tricks on him. But something didn't sit right. He'd learned long ago to trust his gut, and right now, it was screaming that he wasn't alone. Alex took another look around the stage. The grandeur of the Velvet Curtain Theater was undeniable, even under such grim circumstances. The intricate carvings along the proscenium arch, the plush red velvet seats, and the massive chandelier that hung like a glittering crown above it all. It was breathtaking. But tonight, all that beauty felt tainted, overshadowed by the weight of Evelyn Rose's death. As he moved toward the wings, his mind began piecing together what he knew so far. Evelyn's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a puzzle. The bloody script clutched in her hand, the eerie line underlined in red ink, and the strange tension among the cast and crew. It all pointed to something far more calculated than a crime of passion. Someone had planned this, someone who wanted to send a message. But to whom? And why? The crew members, still lingering in the lobby under the watchful eyes of officers, were a mix of shock and unease. Alex had taken a quick glance at them earlier, and the range of emotions on their faces had been telling. Some were genuinely distraught, their eyes red from tears, while others seemed more reserved. Guilty, perhaps, or just afraid of what might come to light. He recalled the director, Marcus Dane, a man whose reputation for perfectionism was as well known as his fiery temper. Marcus had been pacing the lobby earlier, running a hand through his graying hair and muttering to himself. He'd given Alex a firm alibi, insisting he'd been in the lighting booth during the rehearsal's final moments, but his jittery demeanor suggested there was more he wasn't saying. Then there was Claire Bennett, Evelyn's understudy. She was younger, less experienced, and carried an air of nervous energy that could have been attributed to the shock of the night or to something more sinister. Alex couldn't ignore the tension that had crackled between Claire and Evelyn during earlier rehearsals, as reported by several cast members. Could jealousy have driven Claire to do something unthinkable? Or was she just another pawn in someone else's deadly game? And finally, there was Nathan Cross, the playwright. Nathan had always been an enigma. He rarely attended rehearsals, preferring to work from the solitude of his study, but tonight he'd been in the audience, seated in the shadows. His presence had surprised many of the cast, who claimed they'd barely seen him during the entire production process. Why had he chosen this night to make an appearance? And why did his gaze linger on Evelyn during the performance, as if he knew something no one else did? As Alex replayed these details in his mind, a faint sound broke through his thoughts, a soft rustling, like fabric brushing against wood. He froze, his flashlight sweeping the wings until it landed on a figure. "Stop!" he barked, his voice echoing sharply through the theater. The figure bolted. Alex cursed under his breath and sprinted after them, weaving through the labyrinth of backstage corridors. Whoever it was, they were fast, slipping through the maze-like halls with the agility of someone who knew the theater well. Alex's footsteps pounded against the floor, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He could hear the faint sounds of their escape, a door creaking open, the faint scuff of shoes against the stairs. He burst through a doorway, emerging onto the rooftop. The city skyline stretched out before him, a glittering contrast to the chaos below. The figure was nowhere in sight. Alex scanned the area, his flashlight darting across the rooftop's edges, but it was as if they'd vanished into thin air. Frustration gnawed at him. Whoever they were, they'd slipped through his grasp, for now. He made his way back inside, the cold air clinging to him like a second skin. His mind raced with possibilities. Was the figure connected to Evelyn's death? Were they a witness? Or the killer? And if it was the latter, what had they been doing lurking backstage after the crime scene had been secured? Back in the main theater, Officer Ramirez, Alex's trusted partner, was waiting for him. She raised an eyebrow as he approached, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, handing him a bottle of water. "Not a ghost," Alex muttered, taking a sip, "but someone who doesn't want to be caught." Ramirez frowned. "Someone was back there?" Yeah, got away though. Couldn't get a clear look. Alex ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his tone. We need to tighten security. No one gets in or out without clearance. Already on it, Ramirez replied. But Alex, this whole thing feels off. I mean, who murders someone in the middle of a rehearsal and leaves behind something as strange as that bloody script? Alex nodded, his thoughts aligning with hers. It's not just a murder, it's a performance. Whoever did this wanted to make a statement, and until we figure out what that statement is, we're just chasing shadows. Ramirez sighed, glancing toward the stage. You think it's someone from the cast? Too early to say, Alex admitted, but they all had access, and motives if you dig deep enough. He glanced around the theater, his eyes narrowing as they landed on the script still sealed in an evidence bag on a nearby table. The line underlined in red ink seemed to taunt him. The final act begins when the curtain falls. What did it mean? Was it a warning, a clue, or something else entirely? As the night stretched on, Alex knew one thing for certain. The Velvet Curtain Theater was hiding secrets, and until he uncovered them, the killer would remain one step ahead. The hours dragged on, and the Velvet Curtain Theater seemed to grow darker with each passing moment, as if the very air inside the grand hall had turned heavy with secrets. Detective Alex Hart stood near the stage, his eyes fixed on the evidence bag containing the blood-stained script. It was an enigma he couldn't shake. The lines scrawled in red ink echoed in his mind like a haunting refrain. It wasn't just a clue, it felt like a dare. But from who? And to what end? He turned his attention back to the cast and crew. They sat scattered in the theater's plush seats, their faces pale and weary under the flickering glow of the emergency lights. None of them looked each other in the eye. Was it guilt, fear, or just the weight of the tragedy sinking in? Alex's gaze lingered on Marcus Dane, the director. Marcus was gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles had turned white. His usual air of command was gone, replaced by something fragile, almost desperate. Director Dane, Alex said, stepping closer. Marcus flinched slightly, but quickly masked it with a stiff nod. Yes, detective? He replied, his voice low and strained. I need you to walk me through the moments leading up to Evelyn's death, Alex said. Anything you can remember, no matter how small, might help. Marcus sighed, his shoulders slumping as though the weight of the question pressed down on him. We were rehearsing Act 3, he began. It was one of the most intense scenes, Evelyn's character confronting her lover about a betrayal. She was brilliant, as always, but something felt off tonight. What do you mean by off? Alex asked, his tone sharpening. Marcus hesitated, his eyes darting toward the cast seated a few rows away. She seemed distracted, he admitted. Her timing was slightly off, not enough for the audience to notice, but I did. Evelyn never made mistakes like that. Did she say anything to you? Mention anything unusual? Alex pressed. No, Marcus replied, his voice wavering. But during the break, I saw her arguing with someone. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but it was heated. I didn't think much of it at the time. Who was she arguing with? Alex asked, his heart rate quickening. Marcus glanced toward the cast, his expression conflicted. Claire, he finally said, her understudy. Alex's eyes narrowed. Claire Bennett? Yes, Marcus confirmed. She looked upset. I figured it was just nerves. She's been under a lot of pressure, stepping into Evelyn's shadow. Alex nodded, filing the information away. Thank you, Director Dane. Stay close. I may have more questions later. He turned his attention to Claire, who sat near the edge of the row, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. As Alex approached, she looked up, her wide eyes glistening with unshed tears. Claire, he said gently, taking a seat beside her. I need you to be honest with me. What were you and Evelyn arguing about earlier tonight? Her breath hitched, and she shook her head. It wasn't an argument, she insisted, her voice trembling. I mean, not really. We just had a disagreement. About what? Alex pressed. Claire hesitated, her gaze darting toward the stage. She accused me of going behind her back, she said softly. She thought I'd been trying to undermine her with the director, spreading rumors about her performance. But I didn't. I would never do that. Alex studied her face carefully. Did Evelyn believe you? I don't think so, Claire admitted, tears spilling over. She was furious. She said she'd make sure I never worked in this town again. But I swear, Detective, I didn't do anything. I didn't hurt her. Alex nodded, his expression unreadable. Why do you think she accused you? Did someone put that idea in her head? I don't know, Claire whispered. Maybe. Evelyn, she had a lot of pressure on her. People were always watching her, expecting her to be perfect. I think sometimes she felt like everyone was out to get her. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Alex thanked Claire and stood, his mind racing. Evelyn's paranoia, Claire's denial, and the argument, they were pieces of the puzzle, but they didn't fit together just yet. As Alex turned to leave, Ramirez appeared beside him, holding a plastic evidence bag. You're going to want to see this, she said, handing it over. Inside was a small, crumpled note, the edges stained with what looked like coffee. The handwriting was neat but hurried, and the message sent a chill down Alex's spine. Stay out of it, or you'll regret it. Where did you find this? Alex asked, his voice low. Evelyn's dressing room, Ramirez said. It was tucked under her makeup mirror. Looks like she'd read it recently. Alex's mind raced. The note added a new layer to the mystery. Was it a warning? A threat? And who had sent it? He decided to revisit Nathan Cross, the enigmatic playwright. Nathan had been sitting in the shadows, observing the chaos with an unsettling calm. Alex approached him, noting the faint smile that tugged at the corners of Nathan's lips, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Cross, Alex began, his tone measured. You were here tonight. Did you notice anything unusual during rehearsal? Nathan leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. Unusual? He echoed. Detective, everything about the theater is unusual. That's what makes it so captivating. Alex's patience was thin. Let's skip the poetry. Did you see or hear anything that might help us understand what happened to Evelyn? Nathan tilted his head as if considering the question. Evelyn was complicated, he said finally. Brilliant, yes, but also deeply flawed. She had a knack for making enemies, even among those who admired her. Enemies like who? Alex asked. Nathan shrugged. Take your pick. Jealous understudies, frustrated directors, disappointed lovers. She burned bright, but she also burned bridges. Alex's jaw tightened. Did you have any reason to dislike Evelyn? Nathan's smile returned, colder this time. Dislike? No. On the contrary, she was my muse. But muses, detective, are often misunderstood. The cryptic answer only deepened Alex's unease. He decided to let Nathan sit with his thoughts for now, knowing he'd have to revisit him soon. As he walked back toward the stage, the weight of the case settled heavier on his shoulders. Evelyn's death wasn't just a murder. It was a riddle wrapped in layers of lies, ambition, and fear. And somewhere in this theater, the truth was waiting to be found. The tension in the Velvet Curtain Theater had reached a breaking point. The once vibrant space, now a mausoleum of whispered secrets and shattered dreams, seemed to close in around Alex with every passing moment. The cast and crew were no longer a team. They were suspects, each one carrying their own fears and hidden motives. And the deeper Alex dug, the more he felt like he was unraveling a web that was carefully, dangerously, woven by someone who knew exactly how to stay in the shadows. His mind kept returning to the note found in Evelyn's dressing room. Stay out of it, or you'll regret it. It was a clear warning, but from whom? Who wanted to silence Evelyn? And why? The more he thought about it, the more he realized the stakes were higher than he'd imagined. Whoever had written that note wasn't just involved in her death, they were orchestrating the entire situation. But who? And how far would they go to protect their secrets? Alex found himself back in the theater late that night, long after the last of the officers had left. The eerie silence that blanketed the room felt suffocating, as though the walls themselves were watching him. He could almost hear Evelyn's voice in the distance, haunting the stage, mocking him for his inability to piece together the puzzle. What did you miss, Alex? The thought buzzed in his head, relentless, like a whisper carried by the wind. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed in the darkened hallways. It wasn't the typical creak of the building settling. This was something deliberate, someone moving with purpose. His breath caught in his throat. For a moment, he froze. Then, instinct took over. Alex crept down the hallway, his flashlight casting long, jagged shadows on the walls. His heart raced with the knowledge that whatever or whoever was hiding in the dark had been waiting for him. The footsteps grew louder as he approached the backstage area, and Alex's mind raced through the possibilities. Was it one of the cast members trying to cover their tracks? Or was it someone else? Someone who'd been in the theater all along, Playing a dangerous game? He rounded the corner, his flashlight sweeping across the space. But there was no one there. The silence returned, suffocating and absolute. Alex cursed under his breath, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling with unease. Something wasn't right. He could feel it in his bones. Whoever was behind this, whoever had orchestrated Evelyn's murder, was still in the building, and they knew he was getting closer. With every moment that passed, the weight of the mystery grew heavier. He returned to the stage, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness like a blade. His mind kept circling back to the cast members, their motives, their lies, the hidden tensions that had always simmered beneath the surface. Claire's jealousy, Marcus's unshakable need for control, Nathan's cryptic remarks. Each one had something to hide, but who among them had the courage or the madness to take things this far? He couldn't shake the feeling that the answer was right in front of him, hiding in plain sight. But the more he searched, the more elusive the truth became. There were too many unanswered questions, too many layers of deceit. It was like trying to catch smoke with his bare hands. As Alex paced the stage, a noise interrupted his thoughts. The faintest creak, like the whisper of a door slowly opening. He spun around, his pulse quickening. This time he wasn't imagining it. Someone was there. He moved toward the sound, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. He reached the wings of the stage, the light casting long shadows across the empty space. And then he saw it. A figure, half hidden in the shadows, standing just beyond the edge of the stage. Alex's breath hitched as his mind raced through 1,000 scenarios. The figure was tall, their features obscured by the dim light. A figure he didn't recognize. "Who's there?" Alex demanded, his voice firm but laced with an edge of uncertainty. The figure didn't move. "Show yourself," Alex called, stepping forward, his flashlight trained on the shadow. Finally, the figure stirred, but it wasn't what Alex had expected. A voice, low and familiar, echoed from the darkness. "It's over, Alex." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He froze, his mind scrambling to place the voice. But before he could react, the figure stepped into the light, revealing a face he knew all too well. Claire Bennett. Her eyes were wild, her face pale with a mix of fear and something darker, something almost dangerous. Her hands were trembling, but there was no mistaking the cold determination in her voice. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of Alex's heart. Alex took a step back, his instincts screaming for him to stay calm, to hold his ground. "What are you talking about, Claire?" he asked, his voice steady, though his mind was racing. "Did you kill Evelyn?" Claire shook her head violently. No, I didn't kill her, but I knew something was going to happen. I just didn't realize it would end like this." "What do you mean?" Alex demanded. "Tell me everything." She swallowed hard, her eyes darting around as if looking for an escape. Evelyn, she was more than just a diva. She was dangerous. She had secrets. She was going to ruin me, Alex. She was going to take everything from me. I had no choice. Alex's heart was pounding now, a mix of confusion and dread clawing at his chest. "What secrets?" he pressed. "What did Evelyn know?" Claire's face twisted, a flicker of anger crossing her features before she quickly masked it with fear. "She knew about me and Marcus," she said, her voice shaking. "She knew about the affair. She was going to tell everyone. She said she'd destroy Marcus if it was the last thing she did." Alex's mind raced. So there had been an affair. Marcus, the director, had been involved with Claire, and Evelyn had known. It was the kind of motive that could drive someone to do something drastic. But was that really enough to kill her? "You're not telling me everything, Claire," Alex said, his voice hardening. "There's more to this, isn't there? What's the real reason you're here?" Claire's lips trembled as she looked away, her eyes darting toward the shadows behind her. "I didn't think it would go this far," she repeated, as though trying to convince herself. But Marcus, he wanted to stop her. He wanted her silenced before she ruined everything. Alex's mind snapped to Marcus. The director, he had to be involved. But was he the mastermind? Or was there someone else pulling the strings? Before Alex could ask another question, Claire's voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible. But Marcus wasn't the only one with something to hide. Nathan. She trailed off, her face pale with fear. Nathan knew too. He always knew. And he wasn't going to let anyone stop the play from going on. Alex's stomach dropped. Nathan, the playwright. The person who had always seemed so detached, so cryptic. And then, just as quickly as it had come, Claire stepped back into the shadows, her eyes wide with terror. "I didn't do it, Alex," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But they're coming. They're all coming." And in that moment, Alex knew the truth had only just begun to unravel. Alex stood frozen, the weight of Claire's whispered confession hanging in the air like a storm about to break. Her words churned in his mind, each one laced with a layer of fear and desperation that couldn't be ignored. Marcus wanted Evelyn silenced. Nathan always knew. What did that even mean? And why did Claire look so terrified? Before Alex could demand more answers, Claire took another step back, her trembling silhouette swallowed by the shadows. "Claire, wait!" Alex called, but she was already gone, her footsteps echoing faintly before vanishing into the silence. For a moment, Alex stood alone in the vast emptiness of the theater, his flashlight beam flickering across the ornate walls, as though the building itself was trying to offer him clues. Every instinct in him screamed that he was closer to the truth than ever. But something didn't add up. Claire's fear was real. He could see it in her eyes, hear it in her voice. But was it fear of being caught or fear of something else entirely? And what about Nathan? The playwright had been an enigma from the start, his calm demeanor masking something much darker. If Claire was telling the truth, then Nathan wasn't just a bystander. He was part of this tangled web. But how? As Alex's mind raced, the faint sound of movement drew his attention to the upper level of the theater. The balcony. He hadn't thought to check it earlier, assuming the scene of the crime was confined to the stage and its surrounding areas. But now, as he stared up at the darkened rows of seats, he couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was up there. Taking a deep breath, he climbed the staircase, each step creaking under his weight. The air grew colder as he ascended, the shadows deeper, more oppressive. At the top, Alex swept his flashlight across the rows of seats. They were empty, as he'd expected, but the unsettling feeling of being watched remained. He moved slowly, carefully, scanning every corner. And then he saw it, a small, folded piece of paper lying on one of the seats. His heart pounded as he picked it up, the edges worn and smudged with fingerprints. Unfolding it, he found another message, written in the same neat, hurried handwriting as the note from Evelyn's dressing room. "The truth lies beneath." Beneath? Beneath what? Alex's pulse quickened as he tried to decipher the cryptic message. Was it a clue? A warning? Or both? He shoved the note into his pocket and headed back down to the stage, his mind spinning with possibilities. If the message was to be taken literally, then there was only one place to look. Beneath the stage. The trapdoor leading to the theater's undercroft was hidden in plain sight, concealed beneath the dusty red carpet near center stage. Alex hesitated for a moment before pulling it open, the heavy wood groaning in protest. A wave of cold, damp air rushed up to meet him, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of decay. His stomach churned, but he pressed on, descending the narrow staircase into the darkness below. The undercroft was a maze of old props, forgotten costumes, and crumbling set pieces, all bathed in the eerie glow of his flashlight. The walls were lined with brick, their surfaces slick with moisture, and the floor was uneven, scattered with debris. Alex moved cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the confined space. He could hear the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance, a rhythmic reminder of the theater's age and neglect. As he ventured deeper, something caught his eye, a faint glimmer of light reflecting off a metal surface. He approached slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. It was a small, locked chest, tucked away beneath a pile of old curtains. The lock was rusted, but the chest itself was surprisingly intact. Alex crouched down, his hands trembling slightly as he tried the latch. It didn't budge. Frustrated, he looked around for something to pry it open with. His flashlight landed on a discarded crowbar leaning against the wall, and he grabbed it without hesitation. With a few forceful strikes, the lock gave way, and the chest creaked open. Inside was a collection of papers, photographs, and what looked like an old cassette tape. Alex's heart raced as he sifted through the contents, his flashlight illuminating the faded images. They were photographs of the cast and crew, some candid, others clearly staged. But what caught his attention were the notes scrawled on the back of each one, cryptic phrases like "knows too much" and "watch closely." And then he saw it. a photograph of Evelyn, her face circled in red ink. Beneath the circle was a single word, Target. Alex's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a random murder. It was premeditated, planned with meticulous detail. But by who and why? His eyes fell on the cassette tape, its label faded and unreadable. He slipped it into his pocket, knowing it could hold the answers he desperately needed. As he stood, the sound of footsteps echoed from above. His blood ran cold. Someone was in the theater. He turned off his flashlight, plunging the undercroft into darkness, and listened. The footsteps were deliberate, unhurried, as though the person knew exactly where they were going. Alex pressed himself against the wall, his mind racing. Had they seen him enter the trapdoor? Were they coming for him? The footsteps stopped directly above him, and Alex held his breath, every muscle in his body tensed. He could hear his own heartbeat, a deafening drumbeat in the silence. And then, without warning, the trapdoor slammed shut, plunging him into complete darkness. Whoever was up there didn't want him to leave. Alex's chest tightened as the trapdoor slammed shut above him, plunging the undercroft into suffocating darkness. His heart raced, every nerve on edge as he clutched the flashlight in his hand, hesitant to switch it back on. Whoever was up there wanted him trapped, or worse. He crouched low, his breath shallow, ears straining to pick up any movement from above. The faintest creak of footsteps echoed through the silence, deliberate and measured, like a predator circling its prey. Panic threatened to take hold, but Alex forced himself to stay calm. He fumbled in his pocket, feeling the edges of the cassette tape, the photographs, the evidence that could finally crack this case wide open. But he needed to get out of there first. Slowly, he switched his flashlight back on, its weak beam slicing through the darkness. He scanned the undercroft for another way out, his pulse pounding in his ears. Then he saw it, a narrow tunnel branching off from the main space, half obscured by stacked crates and tattered fabric. Without hesitation, Alex slipped into the opening, ducking low to avoid the low-hanging beams. The tunnel was claustrophobic, the air damp and thick with the scent of mildew, but it offered a sliver of hope. He crawled forward, the light trembling in his grip as the sound of footsteps faded behind him. He had to move fast. The tunnel led him to another small chamber, empty, except for an old ladder bolted to the wall. Above him was another trapdoor, this one rusted and weathered with age. He pushed against it cautiously, the metal groaning in protest, and peered through the crack. The room above was dimly lit, the faint glow of a street lamp seeping through a grimy window. Alex climbed up, emerging in what appeared to be an old storage room on the far side of the theater. He pushed the trapdoor shut behind him, bracing it with a nearby crate, and allowed himself a moment to breathe. His mind raced with the weight of what he'd discovered in the chest, the marked photograph of Evelyn, the ominous notes. Someone had planned her murder meticulously. But was it Marcus, Nathan, Claire, or someone else entirely? Suddenly, a faint click shattered the silence. Alex froze, his eyes darting to the door. It creaked open slowly, and a figure stepped into the room. His flashlight illuminated the face, and his stomach dropped. It was Nathan. The playwright's usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a sharp intensity that sent a chill down Alex's spine. His eyes gleamed with something unrecognizable, something dangerous. In his hand, he held a small revolver, its barrel gleaming under the dim light. "I knew you'd figure it out," Nathan said, his voice steady, almost resigned. "You're more persistent than I expected, Alex." Alex raised his hand slightly, keeping his movements slow. "Nathan, put the gun down. We can talk about this." Nathan shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Talk? That's all I ever did. I wrote and I wrote, pouring my soul into stories that no one cared about. Evelyn saw to that. She tore me apart piece by piece, taking credit for my work, humiliating me every chance she got. And when I finally wrote something that could save my career, she threatened to destroy it. She said the play would never see the light of day." Alex's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of Nathan's confession. "So you killed her?" he asked, his voice firm but calm. "Because of the play?" Nathan's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on the revolver. "It wasn't just the play. It was everything. She took my work, my reputation, my life. I couldn't let her win again." "But you didn't plan this alone," Alex pressed, watching for an opening. "You had help? Claire? Marcus?" Nathan's expression faltered for a moment, the flicker of doubt giving Alex the confirmation he needed. Claire was desperate to protect Marcus, Nathan admitted. And Marcus, he's not as innocent as he pretends to be. But they didn't know what I was really planning. They thought I'd scare her, maybe drive her out of the theater. They didn't know it would end like this. So you used them, Alex said, his voice laced with quiet fury. You manipulated everyone to get what you wanted. Nathan's smile returned, colder this time. Isn't that what Evelyn did to all of us? She deserved it, Alex. She deserved worse. Before Alex could respond, a sudden noise from the hallway drew both their attention. The door burst open, and Claire stumbled in, her face pale with terror. Nathan, stop, she cried, her voice trembling. This isn't what we agreed on. Nathan turned on her, his composure cracking. You shouldn't be here, Claire. You've already done enough damage. Claire's eyes darted to Alex, then back to Nathan. You don't have to do this. We can still fix it. But Nathan shook his head, his finger hovering over the trigger. It's too late for that. In the split second that followed, Alex saw his chance. He lunged forward, knocking the revolver from Nathan's hand. The gun skittered across the floor as the two men struggled, their movements frantic and chaotic. Claire screamed, but Alex barely heard her, his focus locked on disarming Nathan. Finally, with a final surge of strength, Alex pinned him to the ground. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Claire had called them. She must have. As the officers burst into the room, Alex stepped back, letting them take control. Nathan was cuffed and led away, his defiant gaze never leaving Alex. As the chaos subsided, Alex sank into a nearby chair, his body trembling with exhaustion. Claire sat across from him, her face streaked with tears. I didn't know he'd go this far, she whispered. I just wanted to protect Marcus. Alex nodded, too drained to respond. The mystery was solved, but the cost was heavy. Evelyn's death had been the result of jealousy, manipulation, and ambition spiraling out of control. And yet, even as Nathan was taken away, a nagging thought lingered in Alex's mind. What if there was more to the story, something still hidden in the shadows of the Velvet Curtain Theater? The theater was eerily quiet as the last police car pulled away, its flashing lights disappearing into the distance. Alex stood near the stage, staring at the darkened seats that seemed to stretch endlessly into the shadows. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on him, the pieces of the mystery settling into place, but leaving behind a heavy residue. Nathan's arrest had brought an end to the chaos. Yet Alex couldn't shake the feeling that the theater still held secrets, tucked away in its forgotten corners. Claire sat a few feet away, her hands trembling as she nursed a cup of coffee one of the officers had handed her. Her eyes were red and swollen, a mixture of exhaustion and guilt etched across her face. She hadn't said much after the police took Nathan, only offering short, choked explanations about her and Marcus's involvement. Alex couldn't blame her entirely. She had been swept up in something far more sinister than she'd anticipated, her loyalty to Marcus blinding her to the dangers. You should get some rest, Alex said softly, breaking the silence. His voice felt hollow, the adrenaline of the night fading into a dull ache. Claire shook her head, her gaze fixed on the stage. I can't, not yet. She took a shaky breath, her fingers tightening around the coffee cup. You think it's over, don't you? Alex hesitated. Nathan's in custody? He confessed. It's over, Claire. But Claire's expression told him otherwise. There's something else, something I didn't tell you. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and regret. Nathan wasn't working alone. He wasn't the only one who wanted Evelyn gone. Alex's stomach tightened. What do you mean? Claire set the cup down, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. Marcus knew more than he let on. He knew Nathan was planning something drastic. He didn't stop him because he thought it might help him, too. Evelyn was threatening to pull funding from his next production. If she was out of the picture, Marcus would have everything he needed to move forward. The revelation hit Alex like a punch to the gut. Marcus had always seemed so confident, so in control. To think he had turned a blind eye to Nathan's plans was almost unthinkable. But at the same time, it made sense. Ambition could drive people to do unthinkable things, especially in a world as cutthroat as the theater. Where is he now? Alex asked, his voice low. Claire shook her head. I don't know. After the police came, he just disappeared. I think he knew the truth would come out eventually. Alex rubbed his temples, exhaustion seeping into his bones. The mystery had unraveled, but the fallout was far from over. There were still questions to be answered, loose ends to tie up. And somewhere out there, Marcus was running from the consequences of his silence. As the night wore on, the theater seemed to take on a different air. The weight of the past few days lingered, but there was also a sense of finality, as though the building itself was ready to let go of its secrets. Alex and Claire stayed until dawn, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the cracked windows and bathing the stage in a soft, golden glow. By morning, Claire finally agreed to leave, her steps hesitant as she walked toward the exit. Before she left, she turned to Alex, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for not giving up. Evelyn deserved justice, and I'm sorry for everything." Alex nodded, his expression softening. "Take care of yourself, Claire, and if you ever need help, you know where to find me." With that, she was gone, leaving Alex alone in the theater once more. He stood on the stage, the weight of the case finally catching up to him. His eyes wandered to the rows of empty seats, imagining the stories they had witnessed over the years. The Velvet Curtain Theater had been a place of art, ambition, and betrayal, its history marked by triumphs and tragedies. And now it was a crime scene. As he gathered his belongings, Alex's gaze fell on the chest he had found in the Undercroft. The police had taken most of its contents, but he had kept one photograph, Evelyn, smiling brightly in a candid moment backstage. She had been a complicated woman, brilliant and flawed, her life cut short by those who couldn't see past their own desires. He slipped the photograph into his pocket, a quiet reminder of the case that had tested him in ways he hadn't expected. Solving the mystery had brought closure, but it also left behind scars on him, on Claire, on everyone involved. The theater would likely remain closed for months, maybe longer, as the investigation wrapped up and its history was scrutinized. But Alex knew one thing for certain. He would never forget the Velvet Curtain Theater or the night it almost consumed him. As he stepped out into the morning light, the city buzzed with life, unaware of the drama that had unfolded in the shadows. Alex took a deep breath, letting the crisp air fill his lungs. The case was over, but his work was far from done. There would always be another mystery, another story waiting to be uncovered. And Alex would be ready, flashlight in hand, ready to face whatever came next. Walking away from the theater, he couldn't help but glance back one last time. The grand, weathered building stood tall, its facade bathed in sunlight. It looked almost peaceful, its secrets finally laid bare. But Alex knew better. Some mysteries were meant to stay hidden, locked away in the depths of forgotten places. And some, like the theater murder, demanded to be brought into the light, no matter the cost.